Media from the Huffington Post to BuzzFeed has been showing this photo, this collection of walruses beached down in Antarctica. I thought it was Alaska's North Shore, as proof of climate change or climate disruption, as they call it. It's warm, they beach, the world's ending, right? Actually, probably not. Joining me is global warming skeptic Marc Morano from Climate Depot to talk more about this. Marc, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dana. Happy to be here.
I was reading about I was just reading some of the reactions to this. There was a zoologist, Dr. Susan Crockford, who was saying that these walrus, the stampede deaths. I didn't know, honestly. I love animals, but I didn't know that walruses could stampede. But I'm not a flat earther, I swear. That's not new. It's due to low ice cover. But then you hear other people who claim to be climate experts, if you will, which I think is kind of like climate change experts, sort of a snake oil salesman, saying this basically means we're all going to die, Marc. So is this, let me just ask you, start off with this. Is this unusual, what we're seeing in these photos?
No, not at all. In fact, there's reports going back to 1604, and that's the year 1604, of these walrus haul-outs. They're called haul-outs, or large gatherings. In 2007, they had one with reportedly 40,000, 5,000 more than they've had now. And this is not unusual for walruses to do this. It's been happening since walruses have existed as a species. And the important thing here is the Pacific population of walruses is over 200,000 members at the very least, and that's more than double the estimates of the 1950s. So if anything, walrus numbers are rising, and this is a completely normal event. And by the way, the zoologist, Dr. Crockford, you quoted, termed this whole story, quote, blatant nonsense. That was her term. Not a very scientific term, but I think accurate given these claims.
Right, and we're told that, at least from Huffington Post and some like a ton of other media outlets. I mean, there's too many to actually mention and list here, but they say, well, the reason that you have these thousands of walruses, they can weigh up to about 4,000 pounds each. The reason they're all here is because there's no more ice left in the ocean for them to go and sit on. True?
No. First of all, Arctic ice is way up. Second of all, the Arctic ice is way up from the last few years, but the Arctic ice is down from the late 1970s. Well, what happened in the 1970s? We had a global cooling scare, and they started the satellite monitoring. They put the satellites in at probably a 40-year high point of Arctic ice. We're probably back at levels of the 1930s of ice in the Arctic to around 1940. Walruses have survived all these years and decades and thousands without a concern about this Arctic ice. In fact, in the fall, the walruses migrate away from the ice to land exactly as they're doing. So they're not showing signs of distress. This is normal. And several years ago, 2007, they had a stampede of walruses. 3,000 were dead. They're upset about 50 in this report in 2014. And by the way, 100 dead carcasses of walruses fed 185 polar bears that came in to eat them. So if you're worried about the polar bears, dead walruses are actually great food for the polar bears. They're benefiting. Yeah,
they're out there saying more dead walruses. Yeah, that's right. Is the walrus just the new polar bear in terms of the animal that climate change folks want to use to get you to feel sorry for them and sympathize with their movement?
Yes. They're trying, and they're trying everything, Dana. They're trying to say global warming is going to cause an increase in rape, vehicle thefts, barroom brawls. They're going to cause. They've just came out and said it's created ISIS because of the drought in the Middle East.
About that. That climate change.
It just goes on and on.
Where are they? I'm not even quite sure how they. It's like they sit around and they try to come up with the most insane stories. How on earth can you say that climate change created ISIS? Terrorists are angry because
I actually studied this and understand their logic. They're claiming that the drought, I believe in Syria, was extended drought of several years, and that this created desperate conditions, which led to the idea that an extreme ideology could take hold in desperate conditions. Well, the problem with that is we've always had, first of all, the problem with that is it assumes that before drought or global warming, the Middle East was a peaceful place. And I don't think global warming has caused the Middle East to suddenly turn violent. Secondly, there's no trend in droughts. If anything, global droughts are either on stable or declining trends. So there's no way you could say that global warming droughts are causing, the drought, particularly in the Middle East or in Syria, and that this is destabilizing conditions, which is leading to the birth of radical Islamic groups. That's the logic on it, but it makes no sense because if you look back at the history, it's actually colder periods that have led to more conflict and that have led to more extreme weather. And right now, we're at a low on extreme weather from hurricanes, floods, droughts, tornadoes across the board, wildfires, even heat waves in the United States, you name it. They are failing on that, but they are going to keep pushing that talking point. And it goes just beyond ISIS. They're claiming global warming is the greatest threat facing us. You mentioned the extreme weather and you mentioned hurricanes. How many days has it been since we've had a major hurricane? I can't even remember the last time we had such a storm blow through. It's over 3,200 days, and it's actually going to be exactly 9 years in about 3 weeks toward the end of October. The last Category 3 or larger hurricane to hit was Hurricane Wilma in October 2005. That is the longest period, that 9 years, since records began going back at least to 1900 and maybe to the U.S. Civil War. We've never gone that long without a major category. It is historic. And the same with tornadoes. 3 years in a row of record low tornadoes. Even Oklahoma may have their record low tornado this year. They're holding off because it's still tornadoes. You can still have November and October tornadoes. But it's just astounding to look at the claims of extreme weather. They've gone completely belly up for the global warming activists. Well, Mark, global warming activists will just simply say, well, the reason that we're at an all-time low because of hurricanes and tornadoes is also because of global warming. They go back and forth. Well, yeah, they do. And they'll say the reason Antarctic sea ice has been at record extent, broke the all-time record since the satellite monitoring began in the 70s, which again is significant because they started that monitoring when we were in the global cooling period in the 1970s. We've broken all available records for the Antarctic. They're now blaming it on global warming. They don't predict anything from the past. They predict, I guess they hindcast. After something happens, they say, oh, well, that makes sense. But they never predict it ahead of time. There's no way to falsify their theory. Every weather event fits it now, so it ceases to become science when no matter what happens, they say, yeah, that's consistent. Yeah, absolutely. Marc Morano, publisher of Climate Depot, always a pleasure. ClimateDepot.com is the website. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you, Dana. I appreciate it. Folks, we've got a special treat for you at the end of the show today. So we're actually going to be joining the panel in the pit a little bit early when we come back.